Hey, good morning, Life Church. It is a pleasure to be with you once again on this wonderful Sunday morning. Beth and I have this little calendar at our house, and it says on it, each day is one day closer to your next Disney vacation. But I really want to change that. I want to mark through that next Disney vacation and put back together with your church family. And I'm looking forward to that. So I know that these are somewhat awkward to do. They're certainly maybe awkward for you to listen to. But I'm thankful we have the technology. And I'm thankful that every time we do it, that's just one more step that's closer to us being back together again. So continue to hang in there, folks, and continue to join with me through these lessons. And I know that God will continue to teach us and to reach into our hearts. Now, we're going to continue in our journey in Joshua. So again, if you have your Bible or your smartphone, your tablet, whatever you've got, go ahead and ask you to turn to Joshua chapter 11. That's where our main focus will be at today. Now, years ago, believe it or not, I was raised on a farm. And, we had all the cows and the pigs and the garden and everything that you would imagine that was on a farm. But as I got into my teenage years, I, for some reason, decided it would be really cool to grow a pumpkin. Yes, I said a pumpkin. Not just any pumpkin, but a large pumpkin, a giant pumpkin. And so I made a deal with my dad to say, Dad, I bet I can grow a 100-pound pumpkin, which is not all that big, but when you're about 14, 15 years old, that's a pretty giant-sized pumpkin. And so I went and I bought the seeds, and I put the seeds in the ground, and I covered them up, and I waited till they started growing. And then as the pumpkin began to grow, I continually fertilized it, and I made sure that it had plenty of water. And every day I checked on it to make sure there wasn't anything wrong with it. And then occasionally, as it would put on new growth and try to grow new pumpkins, I'd have to pinch those off so that this plant only grew one giant pumpkin. And so this went all summer long. And finally, at the end of the summer, it was time to harvest the pumpkin, and it was this grand day at my house to go, how much does this pumpkin weigh? How big did this pumpkin get? And I had this big bet with my dad of probably $2 to see if I could grow this 100-pound pumpkin. And so we got the tractor out there, and we got some straps up under it, and we picked it up, and we carried it over to the scales, and we placed it on the scales, and the scales showed that it was 151 pounds. 151 pounds. Again, it's not huge by world record standards, but it's a pretty good sized pumpkin. But there was a lot that went into the growing of that pumpkin. It was a process. It was time consuming. It took effort. You had to have the fertilizer, you had to have the seeds, you had to have the sun, you had to have the water. And so this process took time and energy and effort. And now look, maybe some of you have never grown a pumpkin. Maybe some of you have grown a pumpkin that's 200 pounds. But, I bet you've all put together furniture. You take and you buy furniture, and it comes in a box now, and you unwrap it, and you lay all that stuff out in front of you, and you have all those pieces and components in front of you, and screws and nails and a set of instructions. And you begin a process. You begin putting all the A pieces together, and then all the B pieces together, and then you put the C piece on top of the B piece, which is underneath the A piece, and you use the M piece to screw it all together. And then at the end of the day, you hope it all stands up. But it's the same thing. We go through this process to get this end result that we want. And as we continue to look at Joshua, it became apparent to me that we needed to look at the reality of making our faith come to fruition. It's important to me to express to you that at times we have to see how our faith can become reality. And so that's what I wanted to share with you this morning is under that understanding that I want to present to you in a way that you'll understand, in a way that God will speak to your heart, that you'll go, okay, I get it. I see how my faith in something can really become something that's real and not just imaginary. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more today about how to make that happen, how to make that possible. And here's the best way I know to start this, is for you to understand that in order for your faith to become a reality, it has to start with a vision. You have to have a clear understanding of what it is that you want to see. Now, again, when I was a kid, I wanted to see a 100-pound pumpkin. If you were putting together a piece of furniture, you want what it looks like on the outside of the box. That's your vision for all those pieces and components to be put together. And so, to begin with, this is sort of an introduction into the message, but it's a very critical point for you to understand. You must have a clear view of where you're trying to get to so that you'll know what it looks like when you get there. So, now, why do I mention that? I say that because in Proverbs 29, I know this is not something I told you to turn to, so just bear with me. Proverbs 29, verse 18, you guys are familiar with this. Where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint. We used this last week, but let me say it in a different way that maybe you've heard in a different version. Where there is no vision, people perish. So if we don't have a goal personally, if we don't have a goal as a church, we're doomed for destruction. Now, let me flip over to another section of the Bible that we actually covered a number of weeks ago, and it's in Numbers. But you don't have to flip there, just listen to me on this. I want you to remember back when we began our series to talk about Joshua. So let me rewind real quick back to Numbers chapter 13. I'll read verse 1 and then I'll jump to verse 26. The Lord said to Moses, now verse 2, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. Now you remember, we studied that, and we remember that Joshua was one of those guys. Now, skipping ahead down to 26. Then they came back, so they went out and they explored the land. Y'all remember that. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. Okay, so here's what I want you to get. Here's what I want you to capture in this moment, is that Joshua had already been there. He went to the promised land. He's been into Canaan. He has gotten to walk around and he's gotten to explore the land and he got to see the vision. Now don't miss that. That is super important for you to understand and to grasp a hold of. Joshua had a vision. He had a clear view of what it was that he was wanting to see. God had given him this land. But as you remember in the story, there were some really big grapes that they got to carry around, but there were some really big giant people there. They were scared. There were some fortified cities that they just did not feel like they could overcome. Now, you know the rest of the story. You know what happens from that point forward. But here's what I'm trying to say to you. Joshua had a vision. But then he encountered some obstacles in that vision. And that's where we are today. In our story today, we're in Joshua chapter 11. But let me just remind you, maybe you've missed the last week or two sermon series. But Joshua has went right into the heart of the land of Canaan. He has went straight in and he has made great progress. The walls of Jericho have fallen. Ai has fallen. And then all of a sudden he got attacked by 5 kings from the southern part of this area, and he had overcame those guys. He had whipped them. So now Joshua has been able to come through, and he has conquered sort of the middle section. He has conquered the southern section. And now today, we get to see the rest of the conquest. Today, we get to see the northern part of the conquest. Today, we get to see the fulfillment of the vision that Joshua had. Let me read in Joshua chapter 11, verses 4 through 8. So understanding that what is about to take place is very similar to what took place in the southern part, okay? A bunch of kings, more than double the number of kings, have rallied together in the northern part, and they are about to take Joshua on. So we'll pick up from there. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand of the seashore. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Mermoth and fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, here he is again giving encouragement, do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand them over to Israel slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters and attacked them. And the Lord gave them the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to the greater Sidon, to Maam, to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Skip ahead to verse 14 through 18. The Israelites carried off for themselves all the plunder and livestock of the cities, but all the people they put to the sword until they completely destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took the entire land, the hill country, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir, to Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. He captured all the kings and struck them down, putting them to death. Joshua waged war against all the kings for a long time. Verse 23, so Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and gave it an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from the war. Let me pray with us for just a minute. Father, again, I ask you to speak through me now, to talk about, Father, how to make our faith a reality. Let us look into what Joshua example was for us. Lord, help us to learn from it. Help us to take away from it. Help us to just become more aware of what you're doing in our lives, God, so that our faith can become a reality. Thank you for your word, Father. May it be blessed. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Now, I know that many of you are probably snickering at me as I read through some of those words. Those are terribly difficult words, especially for someone like me to say. So forgive me for mispronouncing them. Please look over that. But listen to my heart and maybe not so much my vocabulary. There were some obstacles that Joshua faced, and there's obstacles that you face in your life in understanding how to take your faith and bring it into reality. Okay, let me break these down for you. This is not all inclusive, but I think God has given us a good word here to learn and to understand. The very first obstacle that Joshua dealt with in overcoming his faith, making and coming into a reality, is time. Is time. Now listen, pay attention to verse 18. It says this: Joshua waged war against all the kings for a long time. We are an impatient people, no matter what. Completely impatient people. I can't stand to wait more than just a minute. If I send a text message to somebody, I'm expecting a text message within 2 or 3 minutes. But that's not the way. That's not the way it was here, and that's certainly not the way it is with God. Now, I grew up in an environment where we had a telephone in the house, but I grew up before there was even recording devices. So if you called somebody's house and it rang 4, 5, 6 times and nobody answered, they weren't at home and you just had to call back later. Today is so different. You've got Life 360. You can know where your kids are at all times. But it just leads me to the point that you guys already know and already understand to be the truth. We're impatient. We can't wait on anything. If you want something from Amazon, you hit a button, and if you got Amazon Prime, 2 days later it shows up at your door. It's that easy. If you really want to do something, you can pay extra and get expedited delivery. But I'm telling you, great things take time to build. Great things take time to accomplish. You know I'm a nerd, so I share with you some nerdy things. The White House took about 8 years to build. The Kremlin in Russia took about 13 years. The Taj Mahal took about 20 years to build. But the one that struck me the most was the Great Wall of China. See, we have records. They kept meticulous records of the construction of that wall. Now, obviously, it was built over time, over phases, through many different dynasties of the Chinese people. But it's recorded that it has taken over 2,000 years to complete the construction of the Great Wall of China. And so, when I read this in verse 18, and it says, he captured all the kings and struck them and put them to death. Joshua waged war against all the kings for a long time. Here's what I want you to see, and here's what I want you to understand. When Joshua battled the multiple kings from the north, there was a great battle, and he did win that battle. But once that battle was over that day, there were still multitudes of people in that region and area that had to sort of be mopped up. It wasn't just every single person was at that battle scene that day. This was a big battle, but there was yet other battles to take place in the northern territories. The big one had been accomplished, but yet there's some remain. So the battles for the northern area took some time. Now, when you get to reading in the Bible, it talks about that time frame is somewhere around 7 years. So, again, from Joshua's point of view, you're talking about 7 years of battling just in the northern region. But here's what I don't want you to miss either, and this is why I took you back into Numbers chapter 5. Don't overlook this. From Joshua's point of view, it was over 40 years for him to see and recognize the vision that God had given him. He went in there with Joshua with the group that went in, the spies, to look at the land. And now, not just 3 or 4 years have passed, not just 7 years have passed, not just 10 years have passed. We know that it took decades for him to get to this point. And here's what I want you to understand in this. It takes a long time. And we have to be patient. It took a long time for a 14-year-old to grow a pumpkin. It really didn't, but it seemed like forever. But you have to be patient. So give God time. We have to to not give in. Time is so important. Okay, number 2, another obstacle that Joshua encountered in seeing this vision fulfilled. Number 2, enemy. He had enemies to deal with. You see that right there in 11, verse 4. It says, they came out with their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Okay, you got to understand here that, again, I mentioned this earlier, there was over a dozen other kings mentioned in those top 3 or 4 verses. They all came together, and Joshua had thought that he had a serious battle that took place against the southern armies. There were 5 of those kings that got together, and in the midst of them, they had some giants mixed in there. Well, the northern folks, even though the Bible is not explicit in the sheer volume number of people they had, it says that there was a great multitude. And by just the number of the kings that were present, you can rest assured there was more than double the amount of people that Joshua fought in the southern battle. So what am I trying to say? Joshua thought that it was tough when he had to conquer Jericho. And then I'm sure he thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? When I get to the southern group of people, 5 of those guys come and attack me. He was probably thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? This is overwhelming to me. And now he gets that out of the way, and he's looking towards this northern group, and there's 10, 11, 12 kings that are now coming upon him, and he's thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Here's my point. The process of seeing your vision come to reality does not get easier with time. It gets tougher. Did you see those steps? The little steps. Take over the city. Take over this little city. Take over this. Now take over these 5. Now take over these 10. This just proves that the process will always get harder. Number 3. The third obstacle that Joshua was to overcome had to do with the terrain. Okay, now, how do you come up with that, Brian? Well, you have to understand when I read these scriptures and I see where I see this nomenclature in verse 4 where it says horses and chariots. I go, why is there horses and chariots mentioned here? And horses and chariots have not been mentioned in anything else that I've read thus far in Joshua. Well, I got to reading about that, and it came to my understanding that the reason that horses and chariots are used is only used on flat ground, level ground, places where your horses could run freely. Odds are that the battle did not take place in some mountainous terrain that was very difficult. It was focused mainly in a flat area. Now, why do we say that? So Joshua had to learn to fight on all sorts of terrain. Verses 16 and 17, it says, so Joshua took the entire land, the hill country. Right there it says hill country. All of the Negev, that's a desert. The whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabia, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills. From Mount Halak, which rises towards Sears, to the valley of Lebanon. You get the picture here. What I want you to see is that there is a difference of terrain. You get the full picture of mountains, valleys, and just level plateau areas. Joshua had to learn over those 7 years to fight in each of those different areas. And here's what I'm trying to press on to you. You have to learn to battle in the different terrains of your life. I mean that in a very spiritual sense. Please understand. I understand and I get it that some of you out there are struggling because you're in a valley. You're in a spiritual low. Some of you out there, you just sort of plateaued off. You're perfectly fine, you're perfectly comfortable, you're perfectly content with where you're at. Maybe you're trying, maybe you're not, but you're just where you're at. There's others of you right now that are on fire. Others of you are on the mountaintop. But here's my point for all of us. We must be prepared to battle no matter the terrain. We must be willing to understand that if you're in the valley, you must be ready to battle an uphill fight, to see the reality of the vision, to see the reality of your growth come to fruition. If you're on the mountaintop, you got to be super guarded, because at that point you're going to deal with pride and arrogance, and you want to stay on that mountaintop, but you want to stay humbly up there. So Joshua figured it out. He figured out how to endure the battles no matter where they were at. So he had to overcome the obstacles of the terrain. Fourth and last of the obstacles, Joshua had to overcome the obstacle of focus. Oh, we lose focus so quickly. It doesn't take much to get us out of kilter. We can blink an eye and forget what we were talking about. I learned a valuable lesson years ago. Again, I'll reference the days when I grew up on a farm and I was learning to plow a field. So for those of you who don't understand that, you take a tractor, you hook a piece of equipment to it, which is called a plow. Ours was a two-bottom plow, and you would plow a field and you would turn over the soil in the field to get ready to plant it. My dad taught me this awesome lesson. He said, pick a point out in front of you and put the front of the tractor, put the nose of the tractor right at that point, and you stay focused on that point, looking straight ahead. Why did he tell me that? Because whenever you turned around and looked at the plow and what it was doing behind you, if you stayed focused back here, you would naturally pull the steering wheel over and your rows would start to be crooked. You could always tell where that happened at. When you would make your pass, you would turn around and you were coming back down and you were looking at where you had been, you would see this bend in your row. Because you lost focus, because you quit paying attention to what was straight ahead of you. Now listen, maybe you've never plowed a field before, but if you've driven a car, you've done this. If you've driven a car and you had your hands here on your steering wheel and you looked at your side view mirror, or you looked up above you into your rear view mirror and you lost focus of looking down here, you naturally drift. And all of a sudden you try to get back to where you were at. So you lost focus. So sometimes we get to placing what's behind us more important than what's in front of us. Now, I'm certainly not saying to not look back and look at those anchor points that God's put in your life, but sometimes we're too prone to remember when this, and this, when you used to be this way. In order to obtain the vision, you always got to be looking forward, looking ahead. Okay, so we talked about in how God uses these obstacles in our life, how He takes us and works with us in developing us through, even though we have these obstacles. Now, here's the other thing I wanted to point out about this focus. As I read this, I mentioned last week that Joshua, in the battle in the southern areas, that Joshua saw two miracles take place, if you remember that. One, the sun stood still. And secondly, God, he loved to throw hailstones down on the people, and He did it in an amazing way where he killed a bunch of people by just doing that. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. That was what God did in the southern area. But guess what? when you read the scriptures and you talk about what God did in the northern area, there's no miracle mentioned. What am I trying to say? If Joshua would have just kept thinking for 7 years, remember he battled for 7 years. If Joshua would have just kept looking back, going, well, I remember when God sent hailstones down on the people. I sure wished he would do that now. He didn't do it. That made Joshua and the people rely on God. So, here's where I'm going. Here's what I'm getting at. What does this mean to me and you? I need you to buy into this. I need you to understand what's taking place. I need you to understand that we need to have a clear vision as a church and as a person. I want you to understand that there are obstacles that will come into your path. They are understood to be there. You will deal with time, you will deal with enemy, you will deal with the terrain, and you will deal with focus. What is the solution? What do you need? Let me give it to you in my conclusion. Number 3, the third point is this. You must have obedience. Obedience is the key to seeing the end result. How do I know that? Joshua chapter 11 verses 15, and then I will read verse 23. So verse 15 says this, As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 23. So Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. So what's the connection? Here's what I want you to say. The success that you see in verse 23 is a result of the obedience that you see in verse 15. Let me say that again. The relationship that you see between verses 15 and 23 is that of obedience. If 15 doesn't happen, 23 doesn't happen. It's that simple. Obedience, this is what I wrote down as a definition from my heart on what obedience is. This is not out of a dictionary, it's not out of a book, it's just what God gave me. Obedience requires us to continue to do what God told us to do, even when it's not easy to do. We have to be obedient. Simple illustration to get you to understand what I'm trying to say. When you were a kid, or if you are a kid, and you have a messy room, and you want to go out on Friday night with your friends, you go to your mom and you say, Mom, can I go out with my friends on Friday night? And she will say to you, I can almost hear y'all saying it, clean your room. Yeah, that's what she's going to say, clean your room. If you clean your room, if you do this, if you're obedient to me and do what I ask you to do, then you can go out. So come Friday night, if you're not cleaned your room, guess what? You don't go out. However, if you get in there, you clean your room, you do what you're supposed to do, then your mom lets you go out. Hey, that's pretty simple. Here's what I'm afraid that we do sometimes. I am fearful and I'm afraid that sometimes we keep a dirty room and we ask God for things and He's sitting there going, hey, if you just clean your room, if you would just do what I told you to do, we can move forward. However, you've chosen not to be obedient. You've chosen not to follow what He asked you to do. See, you think that we can just go into our room and pick up a couple of pairs of dirty socks and put them in the laundry room, and you go, oh, I'm obedient. I've done that. No, sir. No, ma'am. You're misunderstanding really and truly what the concept of faith really is. If you flip into the book of James, you can read that book and you'll understand that true faith comes as a part of works. It comes out as works. You can't help it to understand that. I just don't think that you understand and grasp the seriousness of what you're doing. You're thinking that you can just pick up some dirty stuff and go take care of it and go, oh, my room's clean. No, it's not. It's absolutely not. You're devaluing God. You are devaluing what He says to do. You're really trying to say, God, I want to be obedient as much as I want to be obedient, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. That's what you're telling the God of the universe. It's not going to go over very well. You've lessened the authority of God when you do that. I came across this devotional. I want to share it with you guys in conclusion. It's written by Wilbur Reese, and it's called $3 Worth of God. I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my soul or disturb my sleep, but just enough to equal a cup of warm milk or a snooze in the sunshine. I don't want enough of God to make me love a black man or pick beets with a migrant. I want ecstasy, not transformation. I want warmth of the womb, not a new birth. I want a pound of the eternal in a paper sack. I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. And so, church family, and those who are listening to me at some later date, don't devalue God. Don't you want more? Don't you want more than just $3 worth? I want you to understand that in our church, at Life Church, I can't help but think about the future. Do you understand that Joshua did what Moses started? There was a progression. There was this time. What started here went through actually all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and it went Jacob, all the way through. The fact that when we see Joshua in the land of Canaan dates back many times, only because it says that he did what Moses commanded Joshua to do. Hear me out, church, and I'm done. We are setting, I hope that as a church, we are setting the spiritual floor of the next generation. I hope that we are raising up leaders. I hope that each of us are pursuing God and growing and being obedient to Him so that the next generation that is past us uses us as a springboard. See, Moses didn't get into the promised land, right? But Joshua did. He got him almost there, but he took him from way back here up to here, and then Joshua went on. That's what we got to do with our church. We must continue to push and to grow. Well, church, I am done. I appreciate you again tuning in and listening. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for taking time to spend with me this morning, this Sunday morning. And so again, I love you and I look forward to us spending time together. Have a good day.